Hi, I'm Pam and I'm here to talk about retro video games. Today I'm talking about an adorable game that's part of a series with a rather confusing naming convention. It's Wonder Boy in Monster World. Wonder Boy in Monster World was developed by Westone, published by Sega, and released for the Genesis in North America in 1992. It would later also be ported to the Master System and the Turbo Duo. Wonder Boy is a side-scrolling platformer that also includes adventure and RPG elements. Recently, all the towns in the previously peaceful Monster World have come under attack. The villagers live in terror, the queen is sad, and they need a hero to restore peace. That hero is Xion, the titular Wonder Boy. Who could have guessed that a place called Monster World would have monsters in it? Maybe find a new place to live. My first impression of the game was that it is very cute. The character and enemy sprites are all wide-eyed and adorable. Everything looks friendly, even the things that hurt you. I also noticed that the movement speed is slow. Xion moves at a glacial pace, though thankfully this doesn't last too long, and once you find a boot upgrade or two, you start moving at a much more acceptable clip. The game is somewhat broken into two segments. First is the platforming and combat. It has a very simple control scheme focused around jumping, swinging your sword, and defending yourself with a shield or a two-handed weapon by spinning it in front of you to ward off attacks. There's also a magic system. Throughout the game, you'll get access to 6 different spells like Firestorm, Quake, or Shield. In the pause menu, you can equip 2 of these spells at a time and activate them by holding A while pressing left or right on the D-pad. You'll also come across a number of towns during your adventures. You can talk to each inhabitant and they'll often have useful information on where to go next. You can also visit shops where you can use the gold you've found to buy new weapons, armor, potions, and spells. At the time this game was made, the term metroidvania didn't exist yet, but this is a good, if simple, early example of one that wasn't part of the Metroid or Castlevania series. Monster World is fairly large. You move between its different biomes like forests, deserts, ocean, and ice worlds freely once you've opened them up. As you progress, you'll get access to shortcuts between the towns in these areas. And as you're exploring, you'll frequently come across paths that are too small for you, jumps that are a little too high, or unbreakable barriers that you'll need to come back to when you've unlocked the abilities to let you access them. Each town you come across will have a little mission for you. Regardless of what it is, it generally means a trip to the nearest dungeon and defeating the boss found within it. One cool thing is that you're given a helper for the dungeons. In the first one, it's a fairy who will smack nearby enemies with her teeny little wand. In the next dungeon, which takes place in a ruin, a child that you've rescued will reveal hidden passages for you. I did find these companions often played by their own rules. The combat helpers would sometimes assist with every enemies, and at others follow along rather uselessly for a screen or two. It was still nice to have them though. The enemies you come across are all quite fitting of the zones you find them in and rarely provide too much of a challenge. Occasionally, one will have a shield or will jump over you, but mostly they could all be handled with a couple sword swings. The toughest part is that they respawn fast. If they're tightly clustered, they often started to respawn behind me before I had even killed the next one. The benefit of this is that it makes farming for gold, which you'll need to buy new equipment, pretty easy. Just like the overworld, the dungeons are non-linear. Exploration and some very light puzzle solving are required to find the bosses at the end. For the most part, these dungeons are fun and interesting and not too hard to navigate. Each one uses the environment in a unique way, like having to deal with sliding in the ice dungeon or battling underwater fans that push you away when you try to swim towards them. The bosses are all quite fun. They aren't overly difficult once you learn their patterns, but they all look and behave completely differently and have their own weaknesses. You can see their health bars as you're fighting them, so you know how well you're doing. The end of one of the dungeons mixes things up with a sphinx that makes you answer questions in order to progress, the answers to which are all based on what you've learned about the game world. This was a good test of whether or not I was paying attention. I found the difficulty of the game, for the first 90% anyway, fairly easy going. While out exploring the world, you can stop at inns to rest, recover your health, and save, which is a great help. You get no opportunity to do this in the dungeons, but you do have access to health potions and an elixir which will restore your health if you lose it all. Small health refills also occasionally drop from enemies. The last two dungeons, though, have an incredible spike in difficulty. One of them starts with a maze, which is really never a good thing. The most difficult part of the whole game for me was a punishing platforming section at the end of the Sky Castle. Here you have to jump between platforms that move around a large room erratically, and if you fall down into a room with a mini-boss and have to try it all again. This got old pretty quick. It's followed up by the most difficult multi-phase boss fight so far. But even it is nothing compared to the final boss fight, some weird robot alien thing who really seems to come out of nowhere story-wise. In this fight, you have to stand on a conveyor belt which changes direction and makes moving where you want to go almost impossible. And all the while, ads spawn to shoot ricocheting lasers around the room. It felt a little out of step with the rest of the game. The difficulty of the game can really be impacted by how many power-ups you get. I can't even imagine I would have been able to beat the final boss if I had explored less and went into the fight with worse equipment or less health. You can go back to explore more at any point, including from the final dungeon. One of my favorite spells in this game is Return, which will send you back to the last inn you rested at. This type of ability being included in the game was an unexpected but very welcome surprise. I'm actually rather shocked that a 1992 Genesis game was so respectful of the player's time in this way. One thing that's less respectful of my time, though, is how so many of the power-ups are hidden, behind invisible doors. There's no way to tell they're there other than by randomly pressing up and getting lucky, or looking at a guide. So many of the optional heart containers you could find were hidden this way. There was one mechanic in the game that seemed a little half-baked. In the first dungeon, you need to use an ocarina to open 3 locked doors. You're given 3 sets of 7-note tunes to remember, which honestly seemed a little excessive, and once you've opened the doors, you never use the ocarina again. One thing that really sticks out about Wonder Boy is how adorable everything is. Characters all have big anime eyes, and though their lack of mouths make it difficult to tell their emotions, they all seem pretty cheerful. Even the enemies, whether it be scuttling crabs or sliding penguins, have cute googly eyes and look like they're having a good time. The bosses are all large and similarly very nice to look at. I specifically like the dragon in the lava world and the angry mushroom you fight in your first dungeon. I also love some of the little details, like the teeny tiny bed at the inn in the dwarf village. How are you gonna fit into that? The game's story is really nothing special, but I don't expect it to be. You need reasons to be going to all these dungeons, and it gives you them. Visually, there's nothing really exceptional about Wonder Boy. There are no fancy graphical effects or anything, it just has very solid sprite work, nice animation, and attractive, colorful levels. It's an attractive game. The music is also well done. Most of it has a fairly chill vibe, though in dungeons it gets more dramatic. The best thing is how many different themes there are. There are multiple for each village, dungeon, environment, and even some of the characters. This means it never gets repetitive, and each theme is very fitting of the place you hear it. Wonder Boy in Monster World is very charming, and I enjoyed my time with it. The levels are all really well designed, and though the combat is on the simple side, it's enhanced by some fun-to-use magic spells, a variety of equipment, and interesting boss fights. It's probably not gonna blow anyone's mind, but it's a very solid game. If you want to see more, why not check out my review of Castle of Illusion, or another of my videos. I have a Patreon if you want to support the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.